Welcome to the Attorney Post, your source for inside baseball talk about the legal field with the top attorneys in the country. Here's your host, Justin West.
All right, and we are back again with the Attorney Post. How are you guys doing out there today? I am joined today with Matt Biren, and he runs a law firm that bears his own name. He's in the injury space, amongst other things. And we're going to be talking to him today about what he does out there. And I'm trying to remember, are you in California, Matthew?
We're in Los Angeles.
You're in Los Angeles. That's right. So he runs the eponymous law group that bears his name. Let's just jump over there really quickly so you guys can see the law group. And we should be looking at that right now. So we're going to come back in just a minute. But before we do that, of course, as always, we're going to read from one of our sponsors. And our first sponsor today is going to be Rocket SEO from hundreds of customers. Are you a business owner and you know that being on page one of Google is important, but you're afraid to work with an SEO company because you know that SEO is both expensive and also slow? Well, it doesn't have to be that way. Not anymore. Rocket SEO from hundreds of customers forces you to page one of Google safely and legally through the power of the news media. Rocket SEO utilizes national news media campaigns across a gamut of news sites that rank instantly inside of Google. They can boost your website's rankings in Google in 1 week or less with a simple system that leverages the power of major media companies and network affiliates of ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, as well as local stations from the Boston Herald all the way out to the Sacramento Bee and all stops in between. You can be on page one of Google in under a week, oftentimes 2 or 3 or 4 times for dozens of different keywords, all from one simple campaign. To learn more, visit hundredsofcustomers.com/rocket. That's hundredsofcustomers.com/rocket. And as always, we will have a link to that down below in the show notes. All right, so let's come back over here and we'll go to full screen again. And again, I am joined here with Matt Biren. Matt, how are you doing again?
I'm doing fine. How about you?
I'm doing great. And thank you for asking. And thank you for being here with me today. So Matthew has been serving his clients for over 40 years and has personally, in his law firm, won over $500 million in settlements recovered for his clients, which I think is pretty darn fascinating. He's the founder of the Biren Law Group that, again, bears his name. He's always had an interest, apparently, in the law. It started as a boy when he was watching Perry Mason, The Bold Ones, Arrest and Trial, and it just kind of led him into wanting to do law. He received his undergraduate degree from UCLA, and he went on to pursue law at Loyola. At the end of his very first year, he started clerking for the law firm Levy and Van Borg. And he saw that there were lots of large corporations and insurance companies that were taking tremendous advantage of the legal system, and he wanted to fix that. And so he went into practice in part to help the little guy, to help the person who goes up against these massive firms to make sure that they're getting a fair shake. Again, he's recovered over $500 million for his clients. He's been selected for California's super lawyers every year since 2006. And of course, in his personal time, he balances the demands of his legal career with his commitment to his family. He's married. He's got a wife, a lovely wife named Dee Dee, as well as 5 children, which I also have as well, and 5 grandchildren, which I do not have, and also his dogs and horses as well. So question number 1 that I always like to lead in with there, Matt, what I missed, because I'm sure there's a lot there.
Update, 6 grandchildren, 1 more on the way.
Mazel tov. Congratulations.
Other than that, you've got it pretty right for a bare bones sketch of the background. It's what really happened was when I started practicing, I started representing labor unions, and was very lucky, got an opportunity to try a lot of very important cases at a very young age, but eventually saw that what I'd rather be doing is representing the people who are getting taken advantage of, especially by the firm I was in, represented labor unions. They also had some people doing personal injury cases and some people doing workers' compensation cases. And I was already trying a lot of cases, and I just kind of gravitated from doing it on behalf of labor unions to doing it on behalf of individuals and once in a while small businesses that are getting taken advantage of. So.
Well, that's awesome. I've been a firm believer. In fact, the tagline of our show is, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. And I think that's definitely the case with individuals, especially when they go up against large corporations that know how to use the law. And they've got millions of dollars that they can throw into attorney fees and everything else that the average person simply can't do. One of the reasons I've always appreciated injury attorneys is you guys do work on a contingency basis, which means everyone does have access to the law, which I think is super important. So tell us a little bit more about what got you into law. And feel free if you want to. We talked a little bit in the pre-roll that unfortunately you guys aren't going to get to see about the name change as well. So you come from a long and established, lengthy Germanic name, it sounded like.
Yes, when I was born, my name was Biren, and my dad and my uncle started a business and changed it for business reasons to, well, they shortened it, but they changed the pronunciation at the same time, but not the spelling. So it's Biren, but it's spelled Biren. And of course, that makes it virtually impossible for anybody to ever get it right. So as my grandfather said to him, when he found out they did this, what's the matter with the two of you? Why, nobody's going to know how to spell that.
So what led you into law?
Well, what led me into law was I'm 5'9" and can't dunk a basketball, and so I had to give up pro sports. I was good enough, but didn't have the right attributes. So this gave me a way to be competitive. Law is very competitive when you try cases, and it fit a need that I had to, and I've enjoyed it ever since then, trying cases and trying all kinds of different cases over the years. So that's a large part of it. But like we were talking about before, the biggest thing that I chose this area for is because people don't have a chance unless they have an opportunity to have a lawyer as good as the other side does. And as you were saying, virtually none of my clients, maybe one or two over the 40 plus years, have had enough money where they could have hired a lawyer with as much experience or as good as I've been, or other people who do the same work in our area. And by working on a contingency fee where they don't have to pay anything unless it comes out of their settlement or their judgment, it evens the playing field. And there's nothing. Otherwise, most of these people who got hurt would never have a chance. They just would get steamrolled.
Yeah. So. And a lot of them, they lose their livelihood, right? I mean, they lose the ability to work sometimes or to hold the job that they were holding down.
Yeah. I would say that we tend to handle really serious cases, serious injury cases. And a substantial majority of them, if not almost all of them, have had their ability to earn an income interfered with, and in many instances permanently altered because they just can't work and can't do what they used to do, or can't do it as long, or can't do it the same way, or their work life has been shortened. So it makes a tremendous impact on their life. And this is the only way you can make up for it. There's no eye for an eye, no tooth for a tooth. It's money justice, and that sounds difficult, but that's how our system works, and it's the only way we can make up for people who are really injured.
Gotcha. So what areas of injury law do you guys particularly specialize in? I know there's all sorts of a whole gamut of injury law, but what do you guys really focus on, or what are your main focuses?
We do an awful lot of spine cases. Once you do some and you do them successfully, you start getting calls and referrals on them. So I would say that probably 40% of our practice is spine cases. And of the remainder of them, it's probably another 20% are brain injury cases, maybe 30% are brain injury cases. And then a smattering of serious orthopedic injuries to all kinds of other things like bad faith cases and various different odd cases that come in that just look like somebody got really hurt or really damaged, and we're interested in it and we think we can win it and do good for them. So we take cases based on our ability to help the client.
Gotcha. I mean, that makes sense. So let me ask you a little more practical question first. Then we're going to talk about some of your cases in a little bit, because I know that you've got some interesting ones out there. But obviously everyone's experiencing the pandemic right now. Hopefully we're on the tail end of it. I think that's kind of where everyone's kind of feeling. We've got the herd immunity is like this close. We've got the different shots out there and whatnot. How has the pandemic affected your practice over the last year or so?
Well, it had a phenomenal difficult effect on us. Courts have been closed. They're only now starting to open up. Every case we had, a lot of our cases, because they're so substantial, don't resolve until they're virtually on the courthouse steps, until you've taken all the expert depositions and both sides know what the trial is going to look like. And there's an impetus for insurance companies to pay because they're not going to be able to hold on to their money much longer because there's a trial coming up and they're going to have to roll the dice at trial if they don't resolve it. So what's happened is all of the cases that were set for trial have been continued. We've got a few set now over the remainder of this year. I think the odds are that even those are not going to go because the courts are so backed up and they have so few courtrooms that are able to handle the, if you were watching the Chauvin trial at all, you saw that what happens is that jurors are no longer sitting in a box. They really didn't show them, but they talked about it. They're spread out all over the courtroom. And so, I think one of the lawyers in his closing said, two of the jurors are sitting behind me. I never even see them. And so it's a different kind of setup. And they really don't have a lot of most of the courtrooms, some downtown LA has a bunch of them, but a lot of them, they only have 4 or 5 courtrooms that can even handle a trial like that. And what happened when the pandemic happened is nothing went out to trial. Criminal cases get precedence. I know in Los Angeles County, the last figure I heard was 10,000 criminal cases were backed up. I'm sure it's up to probably 15,000 now. Wow. So the system has got to work all of these cases in, as well as the family law cases, as well as the landlord-tenant cases, and all the personal injury cases that have gotten backed up. So basically, the pandemic had the effect of it shut down our office. I haven't seen my employees in a year now. We see them through Zoom. We have a Zoom weekly conference so everybody could say hello to everybody, but we haven't seen them in a year. The lawyers have recently started coming into the office a little bit more frequently because they're fully vaccinated, but there's nobody here to talk to other than other lawyers. What's more, it's everything is different. It's even for a long time, there weren't as many cases to spread around between the lawyers who do this kind of work because people weren't going out. They weren't driving, they weren't working. And when you don't go out of the house, the odds of getting injured in a way that there's somebody who caused it are really reduced. So everybody in this business has felt that. Our caseload is down. Yeah. Our ability to get to trial is substantially reduced and will be. We have cases set now for trial almost on a bi-weekly basis through the end of 2022. Oh wow! Yeah, they're just they're not all going to go because the court's going to keep hopefully everything's going to keep on an upward momentum, and everybody's going to get vaccinated, and the courts are going to open up more and more. I don't think it'll ever go back to how it was. Some of the things they've adopted are good, like using Zoom appearances. It's just a different world, to answer your question.
I've talked to a couple of different attorneys, and they've kind of weighed in on how the pandemic and the shift to everything online has changed a lot of what they experience with their clients. I've talked to a few people who've said that they've had experiences with online trials. And you mentioned obviously the Chauvin trial that we just got through watching as a nation. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on the idea of a Zoom trial.
We haven't had the opportunity to do one yet. Certain cases I would have agreed to it. Other cases, you just they're the type of cases that cry out for a jury, an in-person jury. Yeah. Also, at the beginning, we were concerned about, what type of people are going to show up for a jury in person when the COVID pandemic is still running rampant. So that's been a concern. I've done parts of trials by Zoom or by various different, technical processes by where witnesses weren't there, and we took testimony from them by video conferencing of one kind or another for a long time. It's very effective. I tried an arbitration one time, and the key witnesses were in London and in Miami, and they appeared by Zoom, and it worked out fine. So those parts of it are great, and I think that what's going to happen over time is a lot of things where people used to travel, to Omaha, Nebraska to do a 1-hour deposition and spend 3 days traveling there and back will get just done. They'll automatically get done by Zoom now. So it's going to make parts of the system a lot more efficient. Now, hopefully the courts will keep doing this, where a lot of the appearances where you had to drive, in Southern California, everything's spread out. I'd have to drive sometimes for an hour and a half to appear at a court because the court mandated that you be there for a 10-minute hearing that could have been done on Zoom just as easily. So hopefully it'll become more and more efficient. So everything's got a silver lining to black cloud. And I think there'll be some silver linings out of this.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, and I've said this repeatedly on this podcast, even, and I do this podcast via Zoom, but it's weird sometimes because it's a very personal way to connect with people. Video chat, I remember when I was a child, the idea of a video phone was just like is out of the Jetsons, and now it's so common. Like literally, my phone can do it, but I'm of course on a desktop. But it also at the same time is still kind of estranging, right? Because this is me making eye contact. And I even said this beforehand, right? When you make eye contact with a person, you're not making eye contact with the person. This is me actually trying to make eye contact with you, but it just doesn't feel natural. I feel like in a jury trial that wouldn't go over well if you're trying to cast a glance at one of the jurors and it's just a screen. Like I feel like that would take something away from the presentation. Do you think that would actually make it harder to do a jury trial, or would that actually make them more unbiased?
I think it would make it infinitely harder. But I've had a couple of friends who've done it. One got a very good result in a case where he was trying it with a mask and a shield on, and all the witnesses, I think they let the witnesses take the mask off, but he had to keep it on, and the judge had it on. And then I had another friend who tried a case like that and was very unhappy with the process. So I think it kind of just depends on how it goes. But yeah. If you're doing a closing argument, I go back to the Chauvin trial since it was just yesterday or the day before. When you're doing a closing argument and you can't even see all the jurors and you can't look them in the eyes, you lose a tremendous amount. You lose that personal communication.
Yeah.
It's funny, we were talking about how things have changed. I had never FaceTimed with anybody before this pandemic started. Now I FaceTime all the time with my clients. I find it a much more effective way of communicating with them and much more personal. And so there's, that's another benefit that you can teach old dogs new tricks, apparently.
That is very true, and it's a very good thing that we can do that. Yeah, I think it's going to speed a lot of things up, being able to be digital, being able to. I guess California doesn't do digital notarization. I was talking to another attorney in California the other day, and she says one of the things she's hoping that they change is you can't do a digital notary right now, but other states, I guess, can do digital notarization literally through Zoom with a notary there saying I'm witnessing this and everything else. But I think especially with that huge backlog of cases, if they can,
well, they basically do that though in depositions where
do they?
You used to have the reporter right there swear the person, and now the reporter's on a Zoom like everybody else, and they're everybody just stipulates that she or he can go ahead and be the reporter and swear the witness in, even though they're not right there with them or her. So yeah, it's a lot of changes, but it'll probably keep changing, and I think it's set in motion now. That, hey, there's a lot of things we can do technologically that'll improve the system. And I'm hopeful that the courts and really every business will take advantage of some of the technological changes that they've incorporated into their way of doing business.
Yeah.
So,
well, we'll see where it goes. I think it's really fascinating, and it definitely has made things different in a lot of aspects. But I think overall the changes are good. It is a silver lining, as you say, to an otherwise dark cloud. So let's talk more about your practice. You guys do a lot of different cases, And I know that you've had some wins in your day. I'm sure you've had a few losses as well. So let's talk about that a little bit. Tell our listeners about a couple of the cases that you've had that were just like actually, let's start on the negative side, right? Let's talk about a loss, maybe something that you learned. Maybe you had a case that didn't get a verdict you thought it was going to get. Maybe there was a mistake that was made and you're like, oh man, I can't believe this happened. But ultimately you learned a lesson, and it allowed you to serve even that client, if not future clients, better. So tell us about a time that you failed, and then we're going to talk about some of your big successes, because I know there's a lot there.
Well, one of the cases that really hurt the most to fail was not a jury trial, because it was a federal tort claim, which has to get tried to a federal judge. And it involved two guys who were on a motorcycle who got hit by a person who was working for the Centers for Disease Control. It's a long story. The guy got drunk at a wedding, and then he went back to work, which he never should have done. But while he was working, he was driving, which was part of the assignments that he had to do. He had come out from Jackson, Mississippi, and he was out here because there was a breakout of some kind of penicillin resistance sexually transmitted disease. And they were trying to get on top of it. So they sent these investigators out, and they told him his job was to familiarize himself with the city over the weekend. And then so he could start working on Monday, because he'd never been here before. And they told him certain areas where he was going to have to go, like the hospital downtown and things like that. Anyway, so he crossed over the center line and hit these two guys. And one of them had a brain injury, and the other had serious orthopedic injuries. They were really substantially hurt. And the trial went as good as a trial could possibly be. I got their supervisor and the supervisor's supervisor to both say that this guy from the Centers for Disease Control was working at the time, because he was doing exactly the assignment that they gave him. And in a jury trial, I'm convinced we would have won it 100 out of 100 times. Unfortunately, the federal judge came back and said, in my opinion, he was on a personal lark at the time. He wasn't working, so it's not. You don't have, you have a claim against him personally, but that was worth nothing. So
yeah.
Then it went up on appeal, and we drew the most conservative panel in the Ninth Circuit at the time, and they upheld the appeal. So. That's one that just didn't. You learn a lesson, which is a lesson that you learn very early when you do trial work. Anything can happen at trial. There is no such thing as a guaranteed outcome. Even when everything goes right, it can go wrong. And once in a while, where everything goes wrong, it goes right. But that's that seems to be less than frequent. But every time you try a case, and every time we try difficult cases, so we lose some of them. And every time you try it, you learn a lesson of one type or another. One case I went too long. I realized I went too long, and we lost the jury because of it. And I hopefully haven't made that mistake again. And it's just, each time there's always something that you walk away with and say, I could have done that better, and I'm not going to make that mistake again. But on the other hand, there's a lot of things that work.
Well, and you guys have been very successful. Again, you guys have recovered $500 million or more for your clients, et cetera. So let's get on the other foot, right? You've learned some lessons. I mean, nobody bats 1,000, maybe your first swing, but eventually we all lose some here and there, no matter what aspect of life it is. Doesn't matter if it's law practice or baking. I don't know, whatever. And so, but I know you've had a lot of successes as well. So what are some of the cases you're most proud of, and what did you learn in the process of those as well? Because success is also a great teacher, obviously.
One of the cases that comes to mind that I'm really proud of, because it was something that was just so difficult. I represented a truck driver who was in an accident very close to where you live. It's what is the highway? So is it 71 that runs?
70.
70.
It goes east to west.
It was on Highway 70, and it was a female truck driver, and she was in a bad accident caused by another truck driver. The other truck driver's vehicle actually rolled, tipped over during the accident, and she ended up with a knee injury. And she treated through the workers' compensation system, and she had an arthroscopic knee surgery. Then she had a knee replacement surgery. And after the knee replacement surgery, and we had gotten involved in it by that point in time and we were representing her. After she had the knee replacement surgery, she was doing okay for a few days, and then all hell broke out. And she started having all these crazy symptoms that nobody could get a handle on. And eventually they diagnosed them as being related to a immune deficiency disorder process. We actually thought they were caused by metals, and we thought she was having an allergic reaction to metals in the knee replacement. And so we did a tremendous amount of work on both of those issues, trying to tie them into either the accident or more likely to the surgery, to a traumatic response to the surgery. And there was a huge motion to try and basically say that we couldn't pursue either of those avenues because the science wasn't behind them. But we'd done enough work where it ended up we got her a tremendous recovery for it. And so that was one that was just very, very time consuming and very difficult. I learned more about knee replacements, which I've had three of, one knee twice and once one. So it was very illuminating to find out how many problems there are with people who are allergic to some of the metals. So
I always wondered if it was ever the case, and I'm sure it's happened before, where you see a client because they come in for something like a auto collision or whatever, and in the process they also suffer medical malpractice. Is that super common?
It happens once in a while. It happens more than once in a while. It does happen. In California, it's a problem because medical malpractice cases are severely limited. The maximum you can recover for general damages is $250,000, which we've done a little bit of malpractice work over the years. We don't do much of it because of the severe restrictions. But it's heartbreaking. I had a client who had a condition called cauda syndrome, which is where the nerves at the end of the spinal cord get have a problem, either because they're traumatized or it's always usually related to trauma of one kind or another. And he became paralyzed, and he was in a wheelchair, and he was a young man. He was 40 years old. He had a good job. He was earning in six figures, and he couldn't walk. Couldn't ever go back to work. And the maximum recovery he could get for the human damages, for the general damages, is limited to $250,000. So when it does happen, that's a way of leading into this. When we see a case that has malpractice, but also has somebody caused the initial injury, and if that person or entity that caused the initial injury has enough insurance or wherewithal to pay for the total damages, we usually don't pursue the malpractice claim at all because it's not beneficial to the client. But it does happen. And sometimes it becomes an issue in the personal injury case, which in California isn't very good for the client.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've heard a little bit about that. And I always think it's weird to put limits on the amount of damages. I mean, if somebody costs you your ability to work for the rest of your life, you should be able to be compensated for that. I don't really know. I don't know how that can actually be legal. Obviously,
how it works in California, and I think most states have put caps on, but I can specifically state in California, there's no limit on loss of earnings. For instance, if you can prove that you lost $5 million worth of earnings,
Gotcha.
Earnings capacity, you can recover the $5 million. There's no limits on medical care that isn't covered by insurance. If I have clients who need 24/7 care, which is hugely expensive.
Yeah.
There would be if that was from a medical malpractice, there'd be no limit on that. It's the human damages. So that it's if you've got somebody who has a life-altering injury, it's where the compensation that evens out, that makes up for that horrible or horrific injury, is substantial, and oftentimes in the millions of dollars. But if you get it, if it's because of a doctor made a mistake, you're limited to $250,000 in California. It's a terrible, terrible, terrible law. So
interesting. Even if you wake up with the wrong leg gone.
Even if you, well, that may be a difference because you didn't consent to them operating on that law. So it could technically be a battery. I don't do this work, but I think you would have a very good argument that it was a medical battery because you hadn't consented to them operating on your right leg. You consented to them cutting off your left leg. Now you're going to be left with no legs because your left leg still needs to be cut off. I think that would be outside that kind of intentional act would take it outside of medical malpractice.
Okay, interesting. I learned something new. I love learning.
You stumbled on the one instance where you can get around it, or one of the few where you can.
That's funny. And I love these conversations because I always learn something new from every attorney. Something, some question comes up, some aspect of law that I've never considered. And it's just a lot of fun. So let's talk about this then. Obviously, you've been practicing for 40 years. It's a good long while. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I've lived about as long as you've been practicing. Yeah. And I'm sure that if you could go back and tell young Matt a couple of pointers, what would you tell yourself? What do you wish you would have known when you got started in law that you've kind of learned or knowledge and wisdom you've accumulated over the last 40 years?
Yeah, I have the advantage of actually doing that because we've become a family law firm. My son Drew works with me and has for the last number of years. I
saw that
6-7 years now. So we're truly a family law firm. So I've had the ability to tell him things or give him ideas all throughout time. I think if I had one thing to do over again, well, there's a lot of differences in the business now than there were when I started out. Like there's very different ways to promote yourself that didn't exist when I started out. And one of the things I tell them is to, make use of all the current technologies that didn't exist when I was starting out, because there's in terms of trying cases, they're very different in terms of, everybody's been watching CSI for 2 decades now and expect us to help them figure out all these clues as to what had happened and show them visually. And so it's a very different way of trying cases than it was at the beginning. But generally, it's a business. You've got to love it. You've got to have a passion for it. And fortunately, I do. Fortunately, my son does, and the other lawyers who work for us do, because without it, it's extremely long hours at times. It's extremely hard work. And as you pointed out, we take everything on a contingency basis. So if you don't have cases going to trial like we haven't for the last year, it becomes very difficult sometimes from a cash flow standpoint.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm going to share, I was digging around earlier and I actually saw a review. I was going to ask you about working with your son. I'm going to share somebody left this publicly on your YouTube page. It's a 5-star review. Getting in a car crash is a nightmare. Drew and his team were helpful, honest, transparent, supportive, and on my side every step of the way. I can't emphasize enough how much of a difference they made. Our case had strange quirks that they worked through tirelessly. Not once did I get the sense that they were giving up or stopped caring. Every time we spoke, it felt like they were really going above and beyond. That's a review just from a month ago. You guys have a handful of reviews here, but you have solid 5-star rating on Google. So it sounds like you guys tend to make your clients very, very happy, which of course is something that we like to see.
We sure try to. That review really tells me he's following in my footsteps of trying to really do everything possible to help the clients, and I'm very happy about it. I actually had read it and was happy when I saw it. So
awesome. Well, here in a minute,
he has a bunch of them also. He's probably better at getting clients to write them than I am.
Well, sometimes I've seen different strategies. We can talk after the podcast. I've seen lots of attorneys that'll say, come in, pick up your check, and people are in a great mood when they pick up that check, and they're like, oh, by the way, would you be willing to leave us a review? It's not incentivized because Google doesn't allow that, but you're just, you get people when they're in their best feeling because, man, you made their day, you made their year, maybe even their life. Which is awesome. So that's
in our business, it's oftentimes their life. It makes it substantial. People don't really realize that, but because when they think of personal injury cases, most people think of small car crashes, and they've read about some case that they didn't like in the newspaper. But the work we do is life changing for people who have been seriously hurt. So a lot of it's a big burden when you're doing it because you've got a lot. You know that your client's life is going to be seriously affected by whether we do a good job for them or not.
No, absolutely. It's one of the reasons I've always really appreciated injury attorneys and what they do. So, well, really quickly here in a minute, I'm going to ask you the magic wand question. I want to know what you would change in the law that affects you and your clients. Before I do that, I'm going to read from our second sponsor, which does happen to be thematic today. It's just how it balanced out today. Our second sponsor is injuryattorneyleads.com. If you are an injury attorney and you know that you can regularly spend a lot of money advertising, but those methods oftentimes yield lackluster results. You can often pay between $100 and $500 just to get leads in the door and often wind up getting leads that aren't qualified if you can ever even get them on the phone in the first place. It's very common for most attorneys to burn through 5 to 10 potential leads just to get one prospective client on the phone. The solution is injuryattorneyleads.com. Injuryattorneyleads.com has people reaching out to them all across the country who fill out a form online, which is where most other lead generation companies stop. But injuryattorneyleads.com is just getting started. They reach out to every person who fills out a form and re-verifies their information on the phone before live transferring those individuals directly to your law firm. These are only people who have been in an accident and who want to speak to a lawyer about their case. You can be sure that these potential clients will meet your criteria for a qualified lead, and close rates average around 60%. You can set up a time to speak with a client generation specialist by visiting injuryattorneyleads.com and clicking on any of the buttons to schedule a time. Again, that's injuryattorneyleads.com. All right. So again, thematic, but that's just how it balances out sometimes. So Matt, let's talk a little bit about what you would change in the law if you could. I think we've hit a couple points, maybe the limits on payouts for people. That seems like something that is almost a broken system. But what else would you change that affects you or that affects your clients? If you had a magic wand or even a genie lamp and 3 wishes, what would you change in the law?
I would change a lot of the paperwork processes that precede going to trial. They've gotten out of hand. Their discovery. I'm sorry. Let me just hang that up.
That's our inspirational dance moment.
Yeah. Anyways, there's discovery and there's so many different procedures you have to go through, and it's just a way of stalling cases in many instances and a way of costing litigants unnecessary money with very little bang for the buck. I think the whole system would work better if it was streamlined. The federal courts have done a better job than the state courts. They put a lot of limits on it, and their procedures for how you go forward if there is a dispute on it are better than they are in the state courts. State courts waste a tremendous amount of time, the tremendous amount of judicial the judge's time, where it would be better spent trying more cases and working on getting cases resolved. So that would be a huge change in the system that I would make. Obviously, in California, the number one change that needs to be made, I don't think it will be anytime soon, but is to get rid of that cap on medical malpractice. It's so terribly unfair. I'm not even speaking from a personal where we would gain from it. It's not something that we do. We have one medical malpractice case in the firm. It just was because it was a spine case and a young man, and I felt that we could help him. So we took that one case. But it's just not something we do. So we're not terribly affected by it, but so many people are. We get calls every day on malpractice cases. And a lot of the time I have to tell them, if they're, for instance, elderly people who aren't working and their health care is all paid by Medicare. And so they have a case that should be worth $4 or $5 or $10 million because they're terribly hurt. And you tell them, well, your problem is your case is worth $250,000, and it's going to cost that much to litigate the case.
Yeah.
And therefore, we don't do it, and I can't even find anybody to refer you to who's really going to take that case. So,
yeah,
very unfair.
It's frustrating when the law doesn't work, and that definitely is a reality sometimes. But I'm glad that there are attorneys out there like you and your firm, Matt, that are helping people to get access to the law. That's about all I've got for this conversation. I want to give you the last word in a minute, but just to make sure everyone knows, I've been talking with Matt Biren. That's Biren, and his website does bear his name, Biren, BIREN.com. You guys can find him online. If you have been injured in any kind of an accident and you live in the state of California, I would highly recommend reaching out to Matt and his team. Clearly, he is a very conscientious gentleman. He clearly cares a lot about his clients and wants to make sure that they're taken care of the best. And that's something I like to see in any attorney that I work with. So thank you for taking the time to talk with me today, Matt. Are there any final thoughts or final words that you'd like to leave our listeners with and our viewers with before we end the call or in the podcast?
Well, I think it's important that the people like you are doing this and exposing people who are hurt, that they have places to go to listen to lawyers talk, to listen to what's involved in the process. If you're seriously hurt, it's important that you do due diligence and don't just go to the first lawyer whose name's on a billboard somewhere. But you actually do research and find people who handle the kind of cases that you've got, who've got a track record of doing it successfully and have been around where they've got the wherewithal, the financial ability to handle a significant injury case. And I think it's websites are good to look at, but also just to get referrals or look and see what's this person's background. Have they tried this kind of case before? How have they done with it? Really important to get the right lawyer.
I agree 100%. But as a reminder, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Step one is always talking to an attorney. And as we always know, we've talked about this. I've talked about this with other attorneys as well. There's always a statute of limitations. So talk as soon as possible. The benefit, especially of injury attorneys, is there's no fee, usually no fee unless they win. I'm assuming you guys work on a similar model, but at the very least, people can call and start the process, get representation, know where they need to go, etc.
Now, we talk to everybody, but if we can't help them many times because we have such a narrow specialization that we work with. If somebody calls on a med mal case, for instance, medical malpractice, if it sounds like it's a decent case, we know the people to refer them to. We get them out to good lawyers so that they've got and most substantial personal injury lawyers who've been doing this for a long time operate the same way.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And I'm glad to see that there's a network of you guys working with each other as well. We often, I think it's easy to view the injury law firm area as kind of I don't want to say cutthroat, but there's a lot of money that goes on there. There's a lot of competition, et cetera. But to see that you guys actually do cooperate quite often, I think is a really good thing as well.
I'll tell you, that's been one of the big changes over now in my 5th decade of doing this. When I started out, you had the lawyers who you worked with, who you could bounce things off of and get ideas, but there really wasn't communication or much of it between other lawyers who did the same thing. Now we have these organizations like the Consumer Attorneys of Los Angeles, Association of Los Angeles, the state of the American Association of Justice. Also, we have listservs, and there's a tremendous amount of sharing. Most of the lawyers in my business are very happy to mentor younger lawyers, and anybody can call me whenever they have a question, and I'm happy to talk to them and happy to try and answer them, because at the end it all goes to helping clients, and that's what we're here for, is helping clients.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much again for taking time to meet with me, Matt, and Again, everyone can reach you at Biren Law or Biren.com. That's BIREN.com. We will have links to that down in the show notes here on YouTube, as well as on all the podcasts that we reach out to. My name is Justin West. You've been listening to a conversation I've been having with a very competent and skilled injury attorney in the state of California. You, of course, are listening to The Attorney Post. You can find us online at YouTube on our channel. You can also find us almost anywhere you listen to podcasts on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, Acast, TuneIn, Deezer, Breaker, Stitcher, etc. Please feel free to leave us a like and a share if you like what we're doing. Again, we're here to bring you some of the best attorneys in their field, sharing some insights into the legal field that they have. Because again, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Until next time, I'm Justin West. I've been talking with Matt, and we'll see you guys around. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Justin.
Absolutely.